ASML absolutely showing off here with the graphics. The file size is so large that performance may be affected. ASML's roadmap aims to apply more powerful algorithms with higher order corrections to enable our customers to continue improving EPE performance. Two things to say about this. EPE forces them to throw away otherwise good product, costs them money. Higher order corrections, aka more powerful algorithms, we can think of this as the skills advantage that ASML has relative to other chip makers. In the last season, the number of units of memory has actually decreased relative to a year prior for the first time in a while. But that was more than made up for by an acceleration in the growth rate of how many logic units they were selling, as well as at the price per unit of both memory and logic has increased, which is how we can explain that the revenue actually increased in both segments, despite only one of the segments having an actual increase in number of units sold. And ASML has provided for us this helpful breakdown of the different end products that their wafers are used in. The 7 categories are smartphones, personal computing, laptops or PCs, consumer electronics, automotive, industrial electronics, wired and wireless infrastructure, the internet, and servers, data centers, and storage, often talked about as cloud. The explanation for why logic is outperforming memory so much is as simple as, out of these 7 categories, only 2 of them require any significant amount of memory, and those 2 are personal computing and cloud.
This video is intended for educational purposes. Opinions made by me or the Sage Seeds AI are not investment advice.
The other 5 categories, which according to this industry survey have the highest growth rates, with the exclusion of smartphones, are almost completely focused on logic circuits, not memory. So down here we have the projected annual growth rates. Personal computing with a growth rate of 2%, cloud with a growth rate of 12%. But the big ones, automotive and industrial electronics, neither of these requiring any memory really at all. This is where the growth has been. On the other hand, personal computing, despite having a projected growth rate of 2%, has actually shrunk by more than 10% relative to the baseline of 2020. Aggregating all these different categories and also keeping in mind that there's a small sliver of experimental parts of the industry that might lead to future categories for ASML in the future, this is a very solid demand pipeline, and they say it themselves. As a result, end markets continue to grow overall. At this point, I'm going to start taking us more towards the business side of the operation. In the past, logic and memory tended to sell together. Well, since the ChatGPT craze, this has broken apart. Logic now significantly outperforming memory, at least for the time being. And that segues nicely to ASML now has a new head of business performance improvement, Mr. Ron Cool. My new role will help us safeguard our innovation power as we evolve to support future growth. Now, before becoming the head of business performance improvement, which I will shorten to BPI, Mr. Cool was the head of the deep ultraviolet lithography business. Out of all the different executives that could have been given this role, Mr. Cool has the most experience with integrated circuits. Most of the valuable integrated circuits, most of the ones that require this deep ultraviolet technology, actually combine memory and logic on a single chip. And ASML wasting no time in getting their in-house integrated circuit expert to head the business performance improvement, the BPI. His definition of future growth very well could be balancing the logic and memory segments, increasingly pushing ASML towards pushing products that count as both. In the details, presumably written by Ron Cool, he says that the BPI group aims to create a way of working that makes cross-sector business performance improvements more efficient. The 2 sectors that I believe he is talking about are logic and memory. Currently, there are 10 specific improvements already in effect, encouraging logic and memory to reuse materials from each other, support each other's field operations, plan together, and share IT. So far, the main role has been to help logic and memory communicate with each other. The next big change, though, according to this, seems to be to messing with the shipping network that has been being used, aligning customers so that both sales and customer support can start to be shared between logic and memory. Well, that's the next goal. After that, Mr. Cool does even mention the departments of finance, compliance, and other such support services. Another slice of life type of story that I believe validates this new focus on integrated circuit products is the story of this woman here, Manisha Devi. ASML has recently switched to a platform development approach instead of a single software package for each device. We started rolling out the new software stack to customers in 2023. This doesn't clarify whether they finished, so I'm assuming that they still have more customers that need this new software platform installed. But for the customers that have had this installed, the main benefit they mention right here, now customers can be confident about adding new options equally painlessly in the future. So we have the BPI being led by the deep ultraviolet guy. He's fully focused on cross-sector collaboration, getting the logic parts of the business and the memory parts of the business to increasingly share resources. Meanwhile, from the bottom up, a solutions architect here is rolling out to many customers a platform software. They haven't specifically called out integrated circuits here or mentioned the cross-sector thing. But given all the other things we're seeing in the financials and in this 20F, I don't think it's crazy to imply that this is about that shift. Additionally, even if we just go to the very first note to the financial statements, the general description of the company, ASML is a leading supplier to the semiconductor industry. Right here in the second sentence, they now say that the company provides chip makers with hardware, software, and services in the patterns of integrated circuits, telegraphed, advertised right there in the second sentence of its general business description. And coming back to this very cool industry breakdown, integrated circuits, summarized as IC, is actually explicitly called out here under the automotive industry. Not only does the automotive industry have the highest expected growth rate according to ASML's own statisticians, but it's also the best performing industry segment already when comparing the 2020 baseline to the most recent sales number. It has almost doubled since 2020. The question now is this a fact? Is this what's happening in the world? Or is this what's happening in the world combined with an ASML leadership that is increasingly showing its hand? The strategy seems to be very much integrated circuit sales. And that could also be an explanation for why this is outperforming so much. It is largely considered by semiconductor industry experts that we are near the bottom of the cycle. And so now is the moment that we want to see what management has planned for the next cycle, for the swing up. I've taken us to the balance sheet where we can see that cash is declining ever so slightly at a very controlled amount, but declining. The short-term investments checking account has been basically drained. Receivables have stopped increasing. Typically towards the bottom of the cycle, you see accounts receivable increase, and the peak being hit is one of the first signs that the cycle is bottoming out. ASML is so on top of it that they are already increasing their net inventories in anticipation of a pickup in demand. And so this is the current assets of a company that genuinely believes to its core that the cycle has bottomed. The only big question then is looking at non-current assets, the property, plant, and equipment, heading from 4 billion to about 5.5 billion. I'm rounding a little aggressively there, but that takes us to a 35 to 40% increase in property and plant and equipment. That doesn't mean that that's how much more they're planning to sell in the next cycle, but it gives us some sort of idea of how much they're willing to risk in terms of fixed costs as they gear up for the next big demand push. If there's this reasonable increase in property, plant, and equipment, the demand does materialize, and people like Ron Kool, people like Manisha Devi are able to successfully shift the product channels towards more efficient integrated circuits where they're selling logic and memory at the same time instead of separately. Well, that would just make this property, plant, and equipment that much more efficient. ASML is projecting, saying that their goal is to have the gross margin increase by a few hundred bips, getting as high potentially as 60%, which it hasn't had in years. But at the worst case, according to them, not decreasing. Once again, this high-level goal, a little bit more ambitious than most other semiconductor companies, really only possible if they do something big, do something like change their sectors and start selling logic and memory together in a more efficient way.
I'd like to quickly make sure that you have checked out one of the channel's 10K walkthrough videos. In those videos, we go deep on one company's annual report. Anything could happen. I seldom know where the walkthrough is going to end up at the point when I start recording. We have playlists grouping walkthroughs by industry and sector if that's your thing. Together, we'll keep working towards becoming financial sages. Please check it out.
Super fancy. Okay, wow. Performance may be affected.